this afternoon. Awesome. I have portable mics up there, yep.
Oh.
It's into two pieces, so when this one's done, the next one is, I guess, right there.
Put them back together. No, that's fine. It was too big to email.
Oh, okay.
More than 35 megabytes.
It's fine.
Okay.
So,
3A and 3B.
yeah, 3A and 3B.
Okay.
Other than that, I think we're good.
If you hear us screaming, it's time for you to
Okay, and you have the portable mics, right?
Yeah, I'll bring them down.
Okay, we're going to get started with the afternoon session, and for those of you who weren't here in the morning, I know some people only registered for the afternoon. Bathrooms are across the lobby, snack bars out there, and we're live streaming this. So if you have a question, there's a couple of portable mics. I don't know where they went, but I think I'm going to have them perhaps. So flag me down and ask the question in the mic. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce my boss, Jason Jirga, Vich, Director of the Population Research Center.
Thanks, Charles. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. So in addition to directing the Population Research Center and also an associate professor in the School of Urban Studies and Planning at Portland State, I serve on Governor Brown's Complete Count Committee for the census. And my job this afternoon is to talk a little bit about the work that the Population Research Center has done with respect to planning and preparing for Census 2020, and then I'll turn it over to Aldo Solano, who will talk about the Complete Count Committee work statewide. Before I begin, I want to thank folks. There's been a lot of hard work over the past couple months planning and preparing for the 2020 census. I want to start with our federal partners at the Census Bureau. They've been working really diligently and very hard, not only over the past year, but many years to plan and prepare for 2020 through a number of challenges. So thanks to the Census Bureau folks. I want to thank the Governor's Office and Aldo for all his hard work with respect to planning and preparing for the 2020 census. And as well as CEFCO, which I'll talk a little bit about later in the presentation, but the Census Equity Funder Committee of Oregon, which is a coalition of philanthropic organizations that have put resources together to plan and prepare for census. They've been an immense help as well. And I want to also thank, finally, but certainly not least, the team at the Population Research Center. So Nick Chan, and you heard from Dr. Jamal Green. We've got some folks back in Portland that have done some work as well. Randy Morris, Justin Sherrill, who have done work on hard to count data across Oregon. And certainly, last but not least, Charles Reinerson for all the hard work that he does for census across the state and answering questions and putting together these presentations. So a big thanks to all those folks. So a little bit quick overview. I know many of you are quite familiar with the census, and then there are some folks that are less familiar, so I'm going to try to break the middle, and certainly this is an informal presentation, so if you have questions along the way, feel free to ask. We're going to talk a little bit about the overview of the importance of the census, a website that I've developed called Census 2020 Now, some current challenges that are on the horizon to securing a fair and accurate count with respect to the decennial census, a topic that's really, really important, especially in the wake of a post-citizenship question environment, which is Title 13, and the confidentiality of census data, the undercount and inequity, changes for the 2020 census, the timeline, and an event that we'll be talking about it before I turn it over to Aldo, which is Making Oregon Count 2020. So the first slide, obviously the importance of the decennial census. Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution says that we have to do a head count of everybody residing in the 50 states, Puerto Rico, and the islands every 10 years, making it a decennial task. And obviously the importance of this is for determining congressional representation and the number of electoral votes that each state gets. In 2010, Oregon missed an additional congressional seat by just north of 40,000 people. We were really, really close. And so if you look at the population growth between 2010 and 2018, this is a forecast that's done by Election Data Services that shows the states that are likely to gain congressional seats in 2020 based on that 8-year trend, and states that are likely to lose congressional seats based on this 8-year population growth. And you'll see that Oregon is forecasted to, in fact, pick up an additional congressional seat this time based on the 8-year growth, as well as Montana, Colorado, Arizona, North Carolina, and then the big gainers are Texas and Florida. Texas +3, Florida +2. And then we have some states that would be losing representation, mostly in the upper Midwest and industrial Northeast, with the exception of Alabama in the South. So obviously this has really big implications for political representation and electoral votes, especially here in Oregon. Of course, that also depends on making sure we have a fair and accurate count statewide. The data from the Bureau will also be used for congressional redistricting, as well as state, House, and Senate redistricting. And so top left, we have our state Senate districts and our House Senate districts. And then this is a focus in the Portland metro region. And then we also have changes, often population changes will create situations where we redistrict county commissioner districts, school representation for school districts. So there's a cascading effect of once we get these new data in 2020, there will be lots of boundary shifts as a result of having access to those data. The second, there's many reasons why the census is important. I'm picking 3 today based on limited time, but one of the obvious implications of why the census is important is that the census is the baseline for determining a lot of federal funding that makes its way to all states, including Oregon. This was put together by a professor at George Washington University, and he actually crunched the numbers. Andrew Reamer is his name, in case you're interested in looking it up. In 2016, roughly $13.5 billion, with a B, dollars came to Oregon that was based on Census 2010 counts. Whoa, I don't think I did anything. And so if you crunch that $13.5 billion divided by our population in 2016, that's roughly $3,200 per Oregonian in federal funding that makes its way to the state that's determined by Census 2010 numbers. So in terms of federal funding and making sure that our state gets its fair share, the census is critically important. And then the third reason, again, many reasons, I've picked 3, is this is really an opportunity for many of us, not all of us perhaps, to stand up and tell our story to the federal government as to who we are, what our families look like. And the way that those options sort of make their way on the form have changed certainly over time. And so one of the examples I often use is for people who are multiracial. Prior to 2000, you could only pick one race in terms of identifying on the census. So 2000 was the first census at which you could check more than one box. And so the way in which the options available to individuals to tell their stories to the government is captured in the data is a really critical part of the census. Yeah.
Regarding your previous slide, I'd just like to make the point that a lot of, first of all, my background, I'm a retired census employee. I worked with the Data User Services Division, and I had a 35-year career with the Bureau. And I've talked to a lot of data users. And my basic point is that you have a lot of private industry uses census data. You have private industry uses census data very heavily. I'll give you specific examples. When I first started my career in 1970 with the Bureau, I started working with McDonald's closely, getting them maps, getting the data that they needed, and there's another company, a third party that got involved, because basically McDonald's used our data to figure out where they're going to locate their franchises. Now, some people might not consider that a positive, I don't know, but that's a fact of life. The other thing, as this thinking back, just to show you how times evolved in that, I remember, it kind of runs together in my mind, but I think like in the late 70s or maybe early 80s when cell phones, or mobile phones technology was just coming out, I dealt with a lot of companies. The cell phone companies definitely wanted to get hands on our block data because they wanted to do like population distributions using the computer technology of that day to see where the signal is going. I mean, basically, they don't want to put towers where there are people. So I won't belabor it, but that's a point that you might want to consider, that it's not just for the government. Well, then of course the best example of that is the Tiger files, because I worked in geography on the Tiger line at the end of my career, and we helped build the thing that you see now. Google, and I mean, the Tiger line's not perfect. I mean, it doesn't have directionality or speeds that you get in other databases, but the upshot is if the Bureau didn't build a national GPS, no private company would. I mean, they build a GPS for the major metropolitan areas. So we basically created a situation for the GPS industry to thrive, particularly since other countries like Canada charges a fee. They help fund their census through their GPS, selling their GPS data. So, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those comments. It's really absolutely, like I said, there's many aspects of why it's important. But I'm highlighting three, and that's certainly another one. And appreciate your insight there. So one of the things that I've done at the Population Research Center with my colleagues is back in 2018. I launched this website, which is called census2020now.org, and let me just tell you a little bit about why I did this. We were getting calls from across Oregon as early as the end of 2017, early 2018, people concerned about things that were happening on the horizon with respect to funding, for example, for the Census Bureau. At the time, there was some real severe funding shortages, and I had council people, mayors, community groups sort of seeing this on the horizon, knowing census was coming up and saying, there seem like there are some really significant challenges that the Census Bureau is facing, and we want to get ahead of this because Oregonians love to be proactive, and plan and make sure that we were doing our best in our communities to ensure that there was a fair and accurate count. So there was a lot of information out there that tended to be very technical, and so I wanted to create a website that simply summarized the challenges, talked about the importance of census data in terms of day-to-day life through a page called Faces, and then make tools and resources available from other states so we didn't have to recreate the wheel here in Oregon. So that's the aim of the website. I don't have time to talk about the entire website today, but I do want to focus on challenges. So I call these barriers to a fair and accurate count. And there's blog posts in each of these three areas. These are the first sets of topics. So this afternoon, you're going to hear a little bit more about that one on the far left, which is differential privacy. And then obviously these other blog posts, I'll talk a little bit about this afternoon. The undercount risk for Census 2020, challenges for inadequate funding for the Bureau, and then also talk about the citizenship question, and particularly the challenges of working in Oregon and across the US in a post-citizenship question environment. The first one is funding for 2020 has been a real challenge for the Bureau, and this graph was put up by the Urban Institute, and I'm going to try to show you here. So typically, these are the first years following the last decennial census. This would be 2011 through 2015, and then as we get closer to the decennial, 6, 7, 8, 9, you see in the past, here in 2000, this percentage of funding relative to the base year increases as the Bureau prepares and plans for the census. And this typically ramps up in year 8 into year 9. And you can see here in blue, 2020 is below both data points for Census 2000 and 2010. And so challenges have been a real significant issue for the Bureau. I don't have time to talk about all the repercussions and implications. Perhaps the Bureau folks could talk about that later this afternoon, but let me give you one example. The Census Bureau does a census test prior to each decennial census, and the testing sites were identified as 3 sites: an urban core location, which was Providence, Rhode Island, a rural location, which was rural West Virginia, and a suburban location, which was identified as Tacoma, Washington. In part due to a lack of funding, only one of those 3 places was conducting the census test, which was Providence, which means the West Virginia location and the Tacoma location were canceled due to lack of funding. And if I'm misstating something for Bureau people, please correct me. So that's one example. There are many, but the implications of the lack of funding is really significant, and a lot of that has fallen on states as well as the state of Oregon. The second challenge is the citizenship question, which many of you have certainly probably heard about. The proposed citizenship question is shown here. Is this person a citizen of the U.S.? Yes, born in the U.S. Yes, born in Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands, or the Marianas. Yes, born abroad of U.S. citizen parent or parents. Yes, citizen by naturalization, or no, not a citizen. Again, the controversy is really complex here. I don't have time to go through all aspects of the controversy of the question. I will tell you that the Census Bureau, any modifications to questions, whether it be ordering of questions, the way the questions are asked, the options of the questions, the wording, all of these are extensively tested 4 or 5 years before the decennial census. The citizenship question was never part of those census tests. The Bureau did no testing on it because there was no intention that the Bureau had in terms of adding a citizenship question. The second part of the controversy is the justification that was used by the Department of Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, who ultimately was the one who advocated for adding the question to the census. And I'll just leave it as a uncertain justification, and if we have particular questions about that later, I can provide further context. The big challenge, and what I want to talk about today, is the undercount. And in particular, that was the fear of many of us, is that the question would lead to a very significant undercount specific to certain populations. By the way, that is, even though the question was ultimately decided to not be on the census form, we are not out of the woods with respect to that undercount being an issue. These are all those words, actually, not mine, so let me give credit where credit is due. Question is avoided, but the crisis is not averted. We're still talking about the citizenship question when we go out to communities across the state. Certainly, you're probably dealing with these challenges in your communities as well. So this is something that we're going to have to deal with and address moving forward with respect to the next 6 months leading up to the census. One of the concerns is regarding Title 13. And I want to just give you a little bit of context because this is really becoming an increasingly part of what is a very technical but very important concept. So Title 13 basically protects the confidentiality of census data. It was codified in 1954 following the misuse of census data to identify Japanese Americans during World War II and the internment of Japanese Americans the government using census data to identify where they lived. There have been lawful disclosures of census data, lawful disclosures meaning that they were not individual level disclosures, but they were aggregate level disclosures of Middle East and North African populations following 9/11. And so one of the challenges that has come out even more recently about Title 13 and the confidentiality of census data is that the current administration in the court document regarding the citizenship question, as that was moving its way through court proceedings, documents show that the current administration officials expressed an interest in potentially exploring the Patriot Act as a possibility for sharing government data with agencies. sharing census data with government agencies. And this letter on the right, which I know you can't read, is simply a letter signed by senators in the US House. I believe it includes both of our senators here in Oregon, basically asking Attorney General Barr to say that the administration is not looking at pushing the Patriot Act to ensure that these data are not going to be turned over under those pretenses, and there's been no response from the Attorney General on this. So as we talk about confidentiality of data in Title 13, this is exceptionally important context. One of the reasons, and then again, tying this back to the citizenship question, is this is a data point that Bill O'Hare released recently in one of his studies, looking at the non-response rates of the American Community Survey. And many of you are familiar with the American Community Survey. It's an annual survey that the Census Bureau does on a monthly basis. And so these are non-response rates by question from 2010 to 2016. And you can see here that there is a huge jump in non-response rates among the citizenship question that began really in 2011 to 2012 and continuing into 2013. And so this gives you a little bit of insight with respect to what the citizenship question would have done to non-response in terms of the decennial census had that question been on the form. The other challenge is, and again, and this, I know this is really hard to read, but my colleague Beth Jaros at the Population Reference Bureau actually crunched the numbers and wanted to know, because the risk of the citizenship question is not only for non-citizens living in households, it's the entire household, right? So if there's one non-citizen living in a household with 5 citizens, the risk of that question, potentially you miss the entire household, you'd miss all 6 people. So she crunched the data here, and that circle on the top shows you that 45 million Americans, roughly 14%, live in a non-citizen household. So that's a huge number. And so as we started to think about the implications of the citizenship question and working in a post-citizenship question environment here in Oregon, we decided to crunch the numbers for Oregon. This was a report that I put out back in January with a graduate student at Portland State. And these are what our numbers look like. 456,000 Oregonians, or 1 in 9, live in a non-citizen household. Do you have a question?
How did you get that non-response if the questions never been asked?
This one?
Yes.
So the citizenship question is part of the American Community Survey. Yep. Which I'll get to at the end is also adding some confusion. So 456,000 or 1 in 9 Oregonians live with a non-citizen, but it would have disproportionately affected children. Roughly 90,000 or 1 in 5 kids between the age of 0 to 9 live with at least one non-citizen. So 20% of kids, of Oregon kids, live in a non-citizen household. That's a big number. And kids are already, and I'll get to this in a second, children are already in a hard-to-count population. They're typically undercounted in the decennial census. Then the third piece is race and ethnicity. Roughly 78% of Oregonians living in a non-citizen household are individuals of color, despite making up 24% of the population. There is a disproportionate sort of effect here with respect to the fact that this question would have targeted individuals of color at a disproportionate rate. So even though the question's not on the form, the question is still being asked every month on the American Community Survey. So there is some confusion about that. People will not see it on the decennial census, but this is a reality of the fact that this question does create a lot of touch points across the state. Other challenges. This will be the first census in 20 years that coincides with the presidential election. We have primary and general elections in 2020. There's a lot of distrust in government. The graph off to the right here shows you the percentage of Americans in Pew polls who trust the government in Washington, quote, always or most of the time. So it's dipped from, in 1960, about 80%, and it's hovering around 19% today. That's a challenge for the Census Bureau. Obviously polarizing political climate in terms of socio-political impacts, Confusion about other Census Bureau surveys, so thank you for your question about the American Community Survey is going on every month, and it will go on next March and next April when the Bureau is going to then put out the decennial census. So some people could get the American Community Survey and have that citizenship question as part of the survey, and then also get the decennial census, which does not ask citizenship. In addition to that, the Bureau did a census test this summer, looking at response rates if the decennial would have had the citizenship question and if it didn't have the citizenship question, to test the difference. So there's been a lot of confusion about Census Bureau surveys, as well as surveys that have been sent to people imitating the census. We've got reports from our state data center colleagues in Montana about people who have received forms that look like the census, asking them to fill it out and respond, and there's in some instances people asking for money. So that's a challenge, and that's been going around the state data center network. I don't believe we've had any issues here in Oregon that have been reported to us, but we are keeping our eye out for that. And then the internet response. So this is the first census in history where the primary response option will be the internet. Households will be segmented into internet first and internet choice. And internet first will get a form that looks like this. Is this still accurate, where they'll have a unique user ID that they can then go in online, punch in that user ID? Is that right? Okay. And then you'll be able to fill out the form online. And those households who are not, who do not reside in areas that have strong internet connectivity will be considered internet choice and will receive a paper copy in the mail. One of the challenges, I don't have time to go into this, but I have a blog post on this that I wanted to point people to, is the digital divide issues. And so on my blog, I have data here for the digital divide across US households. This is from Census Bureau statistics. So 82% of American households have internet access, but the accessibility varies across the population for folks of color, older adults, immigrants. And so we see among Black and Hispanic households, the connectivity is lower. Among older folks, it's down into the 60% range. And then more statistics there. So that's something that we're gonna have to, the Bureau is obviously paying attention to this, and we're gonna have to really be aware of and cognizant of here in Oregon when we're talking about response rates. Yes, yes.
So do you think they're overreacting to this, or do you think that concern is well-founded on their part?
I think it's a concern. I think a lot of, we're particularly around with the internet response being sort of a first-time effort, that people will go to libraries for support. Arlene Weibel at the State Library has been focusing a lot on this with the American Library Association. Libraries are an essential partner for the Bureau to make sure that we have a fair and accurate count. And so there's been a lot of work here across the state in terms of trying to get libraries situated in terms of having them networked in a way that we have the adequate resources to ensure that if there are a lot of folks coming to the library, that the resources are there.
There was a recent article in the AARP talking about Census 2020 and basically talking about seniors. There was an article in AARP talking about the 2020 census and the fact that many seniors would be reluctant to answer via the internet, even if they had an internet connection, because they're exposed to a lot of scams, for one thing, and distrustful. I'm being a senior myself. I'm 72.
and I'm, I think I'm intelligent and articulate, and I'm very comfortable on the internet. But I do like the idea of paper. Also the fact that, like, for example, what's going on with the interference in our elections. I'm glad I live in Oregon that doesn't have electronic ballots, that I get a piece of paper, I can sit down, have a cup of coffee, I don't have to look over my shoulder like, am I going too slow and holding somebody up behind me? So there are those pros and cons, but I think the way the article was written made it sound like the Bureau was kind of concerned, because it's a cost issue, I know, that it's cheaper for the people to do that on the internet, but I mean, you're gonna have to look at the demographics. At least people in my thing, they're gonna be very reluctant.
Yeah, it's a good point. And then also, a lot of those folks might end up going to libraries or other type of organizations to have the support and be able to ask questions to a person who's there, who is not more knowledgeable perhaps about the questions that are being asked or the approach that's being used, right? I don't have time to talk about data security. I want to make sure I give my colleague Aldo enough time here. So I'm just going to end with this, which is hard to count populations. Certain individuals are often referred to, those that are difficult to count in the decennial census are referred to as HTC, or hard to count populations. These include children, rural folks, individuals of color, immigrants, homeless, and other individuals. Census 2010 was one of the most accurate censuses in recent American history, where we've had virtually a net zero undercount across the country. However, certain sociodemographic groups are more likely to be undercounted. And here's two examples. Children, as I mentioned before, 0 to 4, the undercount was almost 5%. And renters was about 1.1%. And then among individuals of color, the numbers look like this. 2% of African Americans were undercounted in the 2010 census, which is roughly about 800,000 African Americans across the United States, not included in the census. 1.5% of Hispanics, which was about 750,000 Hispanic individuals. I give you these numbers because there's concern, especially given the challenges of this census, that these numbers may in fact go up in 2020. And so that's one of the things that we need to be cognizant of, especially as we're doing our work across Oregon, that in a good census, right, the numbers looked like this. And given the challenges ahead of us, how do we make sure that we do a good job of ensuring that everybody is counted in the census and is represented in the data? Two quick slides, and then I'm done. Changes, there's two big changes for the 2020 census. On the left, and I know this is really hard to read, that's the race and ethnicity question in 2010. The first question is, are you Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And the second part of that question is, what is your race? The question, and it's a little bit complicated, more complicated than I'm able to talk about here. The question is remaining the same in terms of the ordering of the question, are you Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And you'll see that the categories are largely the same, except for the fact that there's now going to be asking for ancestry specificity around the race question for people who are checking white and people who are checking Black and African American, as well as Native American. The other big change is the relationship question. This was the relationship question in 2010. If you have more than one person in your household, the Bureau is interested in knowing how person 2 is related to person 1. And the big change in 2020 is this will be the first decennial census that is counting same-sex married partners. So previously, same-sex married partners, because it was not recognized by the federal government, would have had to check unmarried partner on the 2010 census. Here you see same-sex husband, wife, spouse, same-sex unmarried partner. So that's a change for 2020 that is different from 2010. I'm gonna pass this over to you. We'll come back and talk about the timeline. This is the last slide I have, which is we are planning a symposium at Portland State on November 12th, which will be a kickoff event with the plenary speakers, former director of the Census Bureau, John Thompson. I'm excited to confirm that former Director Thompson's going to be the plenary speaker. Fortunately, Governor Kate Brown is not going to be able to be there, but this is obviously subject to change. But this will be an opening session with former Director Thompson talking about the challenges for us here in Oregon, and then an afternoon work session on the more technical topics that I talked about today that I really just sort of rushed through. So for those of you who want to dig into those details a little bit in more specificity, that'll be available on Tuesday, November 12th. It is free, which is always a good thing, right? So I'm going to pass this over to Aldo.
Thank you, Jason. Can we get Jason a hand? Because that's a great job. You've basically heard everything you needed to hear now. I am done. I'm here to see you off. No, I'm just kidding completely. So my name is Aldo Solano, and I'm the Census Project Manager working for the Office of Governor Kate Brown, specifically under the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And my role is mainly to convene the Oregon Complete Count Committee, but as I hold the unique position of being one of the few state employees with the word census next to its title, I also just really do anything to do with Oregon and census. It gets brought to my attention. So my hands have been pretty full in the last couple of months. A little bit about myself. So I'm from Mexico. I was born in Mexico. I'm a DACA recipient. I grew up in Woodburn. And I come up from a family of farm workers. And I think I want to just quickly mention, I think you've heard a lot about the importance of why we all know, I think now, why the census is important, the federal funding, the representation, and the data that informs so much of businesses and a lot of planning and budgeting that really from the private and public sector. For me personally, the census is important because I don't remember ever definitely not myself, my parents being filling out a census questionnaire. And my parents and grandparents have been in this country and this state for generations, and we've contributed, right? And then we've paid taxes and been contributing members of society for a long time, and never really gotten the chance to, I guess, make our voices be heard in that way by saying that we're here. So for me, this is a very personal issue, specifically with everything, all the challenges that we're facing for the 2020 census that you've heard a lot about. So I'm just kind of here to give you, it'll be a much shorter of a presentation, and I think towards the end we'll have the opportunity for folks to ask either me or Jason some questions, and if some folks from the Census Bureau might be also willing to answer some of the more difficult questions, that would be greatly appreciated as well. One of the things I always start off with, and I'm not gonna do here because I realize this is a different audience from all the other census 101s that I've done in the last couple of months, is I ask people on a scale of 1 to 5, what is your knowledge of the census? And people are like, 2 and 3. I'm about a 2. I realize that most folks here are gonna be greatly beyond that. I'm not ashamed to admit that before I came onto this role, I would have answered probably -2, knew nothing about the census. Full disclosure, I was in high school in the last census. In case you're wondering why the hell is a 26-year-old telling me about what Oregon's doing for the census, I'll explain in a bit, or you'll get to understand it. Yeah, let's get going. So one of the first things that we've thought about at the beginning of this project in conversations with Governor Brown, who has a lot of commitment for this census, understanding the challenges that lie ahead, it was around understanding that we couldn't do this alone, and that in order to best tackle the different issues that we're going to be facing and the implications and what's at stake for Oregon, we understood that we needed more people and the wisdom of diverse community partners from across the state in order for us to come together and think about the strategies and implement plans that are going to be able to ensure that we can get as accurate and as fair and as a complete of account as possible that we can for our state. So we decided to launch the first ever statewide Oregon Complete Count Committee for the state of Oregon. The committee is made up of around 32 members as of now, all appointed by Governor Brown on a volunteer basis. And this simply has the charge, and it's been something that's been shifting over the last couple of months, just because based on the needs of the census and as we've begun to better understand what those are, and also understanding better the role of what state government can play, regional governments can play, and community-based organizations, the Census Bureau, and how we can best work together in an effort that we've never done before as a state to have this perfectly balanced and aligned strategy to reach everybody in Oregon. We've never done it before, and we understood that in order to, I guess, be best be fit for what we have in front of us, we have to be a little bit flexible. So the thinking around the Complete Count Committee has shifted in that way. But it is an advisory committee to Governor Brown in the state of Oregon. That's going to think through the different strategies to safeguard and promote the 2020 census to ensure a fair and accurate census count. It's been convening since April when we first launched and has been meeting monthly, except for 2 months since then. I think now that we've begun to, better understand the role of the committee itself, we're able to sort of more focus on our subcommittee work and their work plans to develop strategies rather than having a group of 35 folks and plus to meet on a monthly basis. So this is going to be the committee in charge of leading the Oregon Counts 2020 campaign, which I'll speak a little bit more about because you'll hear other initiatives, and the different players that are going to be leading sort of the charge as far as census awareness. So there's a bit of an update on this, but each of these, the Complete Count Committee was divided into 6 subcommittees from its inception. Again, the thinking has shifted a bit now that we've begun to understand a few things specifically about the hard to count, which I'll list a little bit more about. But from the beginning, we thought about, at a statewide level, what is sort of the best place that we can bring in voices from diverse sectors, from philanthropy to community-based organizations that serve certain hard-to-count populations, from regional governments to state governments, faith leaders, folks who have experience with media and communications and community outreach, and then also folks who have a little bit more of the expertise on the legal and confidential issues around the census. These committees have been meeting also mostly on a monthly basis since the inception of the Complete Count Committee, and have begun to develop work plans around their specific areas. One thing that's important to mention is, as I'll mention a little bit later about the specific Hard to Count campaign, important to note that you may see some overlap within different partners that are part of this Complete Count Committee in that campaign, simply because this is the thinking around before the specific Hard to Count campaign came into life. This is a group of folks that decided, hey, I want to volunteer my time to think about the strategies that we're going to use and implement to reach everybody in the state. So, actually, I'm going to skip to the next slide first, and I'll come back to this one. So, while we were forming the Complete Count Committee from our team, it's just me as of now, our team, one of the things that came forward to us was this potential for a partnership with philanthropy, which you've heard about in the name of CEFCO, which is the Census Equity Funders Committee of Oregon. And they came to us with a lot of good thinking and homework that they had done through the last really 2 years around reaching hard to count populations in Oregon, and through a community-led and community-informed process and field approach of a campaign. And Jason and the Population Research Center and his team have been great partners since the beginning of those conversations, because we went through a couple of different models as far as thinking how much or what resources do we need, what kind of approach do we need to reach hard to count populations. And from the presentation that Jason gave, and also as you understand, there's no real way for us to understand how bad it's going to be in 2020. But one of the things that we knew for sure, or how good it's going to be. I'm going to end on a positive note for sure, I promise you. I'm trying to paint the picture as to why, we were thinking and understanding for sure that, we need resources. And at least from the side of the perspective of the governor's office we understood that no matter what, the best people to reach hard to count populations who in this climate are so afraid to answer the door, the last thing that they want to do is hear a knock on the door with somebody with a couple of nice badges that says, I'm from the federal government and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. That's not going to happen in this climate, really, ever, but specifically right now. So one thing that we understood for sure is that we need to empower community-based organizations who are trusted faces and trusted partners to be out in community and speaking to the people that they know about the census, the importance of the census, the challenges, the changes, any of the specific questions that they may have around confidentiality and how their information could be shared or could not be shared. All of that fact-finding needed to be communicated by somebody that you know and not somebody that you don't know. Just quite simply, I don't think it's a revolutionary theory. So we came in partnership with CEFCO from the beginning because we saw that they had done a lot of homework to engage community-based organizations in the process of creating a hard-to-count campaign plan that informed by those same community-based organizations who serve hard-to-count populations. I'm not going to go through the whole process that they went through at a different time. Maybe we can have United Way and folks from the philanthropy sector tell you about, but they released an RFP. They went through a competitive process to hire a census equity coordinator for the state. A consulting firm based out of Southern Oregon named Dancing Hearts Consulting was granted that RFP to start coordinating with these community-based organizations across the state a campaign plan that was going to reach Oregon's 1 million to 1.3 million hard-to-count populations. So we were, our office led the charge this legislative session in a very in a short time period to secure $7.5 million in the state legislature for a specific hard-to-count campaign effort that's going to go hand in hand working with a larger $10.5 million campaign that includes $2.5 million from philanthropy commitments themselves. So we're talking about a larger $10 million campaign. That's kind of what you see as far as the image on the left. The fiscal sponsor for the CEFCO table and for this pooled fund is United Way. Also wanted to mention, and it's something that everybody who's been involved with this project can be proud of. I think even up to date, it's the largest private and public pooled fund in the nation that's coming together with different partners from across the state to tackle this issue of the hard-to-count population in 2020. The image that you see on the right is more to speak on, still sort of, as I was mentioning before, the shifting of focus for the Oregon Complete Count Committee now that we've better understand and know that we've secured funding for trusted community-based organizations to outreach to hard-to-count populations. We got to think about how we can continue to support the Census Bureau and its larger undertaking of reaching everybody, right? Because we have the 1 to 1.3 million hard-to-count, but who's going to be talking still, making sure that messaging around the importance of the census is spread to the rest of the 3 million. Yes. Yes, because it's that's still cooking. If I will ask anybody here for money after this for sure. I did not get hired to fundraise, but there's been a lot of that happening for sure. And thank you for your question. That just goes to show, I think from the governor's office is commitment from the beginning is how do we reach Oregon's hard-to-count populations first. Then we deal with the rest later. I think in a perfect world, we would have liked to had all that sort of set up sooner, but this is where we are. I kind of just touched on this a little bit. This is roughly, again, this has been in flux as well, roughly how each subcommittee is thinking about how they're going to be approaching their work plans to reach their specific sectors and disseminate information about the census. Most of the subcommittees, and in fact, I actually have an update as far as the model that you saw of the 6 subcommittees. We've actually just recently will begin to convene 2 separate ones that have not been included as much, which is a business approach to engaging businesses with the 2020 census, as well as the state agencies. We know there's a lot of folks from here. We're going to be developing toolkits for each agency and each business, as well as within the other subcommittees. Each subcommittee is developing toolkits for their specific sectors, because we understand that not everybody says, well, time or capacity to come to a subcommittee meeting every month. But if any folks within the next couple of months want to engage with the census, we want to make sure that we make it easier for them to engage. Here's a toolkit. This is the messaging. This is the calendar of events. This is everything you need for you and your organization and your agency to be successful in engaging with your constituency about the census. I'm mostly done, but there's many ways. Again, this is more always tailored to when I do Census 101s for more of the public-facing bodies. But there's plenty of ways that you can, things that you can do to support the census, and I'm sure we've all appreciated it. I do want to give a huge shout out to the Population Research Center and Jason for all the support. I think my job would not be as, it's not easy, but the Population Research Center team has made the job for the governor's office, and I think the entire campaign for the census has been thinking about how we're going to reach all of Oregon's population much easier. And there are different ways that you can engage yourself, whether you want to be more in tune with the folks who are going to be driving the more culturally and linguistically specific campaign of the We Count Oregon, or with the larger Oregon Counts campaign. If you have a specific group within your agency or your organization that you feel would benefit from just a Census 101, maybe something that could be something shorter than this, we can play with that and come give you sort of an update as far as what's happening with the census and the best ways for folks to engage. I mentioned the money and the smiley face. If you have ideas around that as well, talk to me after. And more importantly, I think everybody, no matter what, even if you directly are not going to be engaging with the census on a day-to-day basis and you don't live in census world the way Jason and the team does, and now I do, you can talk to your friends and your family and your coworkers from the things that you've learned today, and I'm sure things that you've learned from before about the importance of the census, the changes. Make sure that folks understand that it's going to be online now, that there's resources out there to get their questions answered, and just making sure that we get that word out, because we only get one shot at this for a decade, for just it's huge amounts of repercussions for our state. And obviously our most vulnerable communities are always most affected by an undercount. So that is it from my piece. Thank you all so much.
So we'll wrap up. Is Jamila or Perla here from Dancing Hearts? No. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple slides. The We Count Oregon campaign. The We Count Oregon campaign is, as Aldo mentioned, is tasked with doing a lot of the hard-to-count population, hard-to-count outreach across the state. And so we just want to share with you a couple slides that they sent over. This is their mission: a coordinated statewide campaign focused on engaging Oregon's hard-to-count communities, which include people of color, immigrants, rural populations, children under 5, and renters, working to ensure the census is equitable, fair, and just, and that every Oregonian is included in the 2020 census. They're doing a number of things that I'm not really up to speed on in terms of being able to speak to, but census training is a big part of their goal, which is actually provide trainings for people, Census 101s, about these particular topics that we've talked about, building a text-to-count campaign, identifying partners across the state, and actually doing a lot of door-to-door and outreach, person-to-person outreach in terms of hard-to-count population contacts. So they've invited all of you to visit their website, wecountoregon.com, or text Oregon to 33339, and then that sets you up into their campaign, where they provide you feedback and information as it becomes available about hard-to-count populations across the state. So, and these are two people, Jamila and Mandy, who are direct contacts for the We Count Oregon campaign. If you have further questions about the campaign, most of you will be seeing and or hearing from We Count Oregon in the weeks and months ahead. So that's it. Thank you. Oh, sorry. This one? So yeah, the Census Bureau Partnership, our area coordinator for Oregon and Idaho is Jeff Bacon, who is based out of the LA office. Is that right?
He works, I think, in Idaho. Yeah, but he covers Oregon and Idaho.
Okay. Shanna Radford, who's the tribal.
She's actually.
Shanna? Oh, hey. What's that, Shanna? Okay, he's out of Boise. Okay. Who's the tribal partnership specialist for Oregon and Idaho, and Kirsten Stein, who's a partnership specialist based in. Is Kirsten here? No. So those are our contacts for our work across Oregon. Do we have time for questions? Like maybe 2 minutes? Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
I had a question about the internet process. You said that folks were being identified as either having strong internet access or not. I was curious if the census is going to be like mobile device compatible for folks who don't necessarily have internet but have cell coverage or have cell coverage some of the places they go.
My understanding is yes, it will be mobile friendly.
Cool. Thank you.
Which areas are going to be receiving the paper and which are going to be on the internet?
Yeah, so that's what 90% of people. I might defer to.
How do we get maps?
I've been asking that question also.
Okay. So the question is
I've been
whether
asking that question of the
let me
Census Bureau.
Yeah, let me just repeat the question because it's a good one. Can we get maps of areas across the state that will be internet first versus internet choice by tract or larger geography? Do you know the answers to that question?
Yeah, those are called the T-maps, type of enumeration area maps. I know we have them at Census. I thought they were publicly available, but
There is a T-map showing what areas would be like leave update, but it doesn't drill down to, there are some areas where instead of sending mail or a postcard to a house, they actually hang a questionnaire on your door, and those are less than 5% of the U.S., but they don't actually drill down to what areas are going to be internet first and what are going to be internet choice. And I actually sent that question around to some other folks, and nobody knew yet.
We'll look into. We'll try to track that answer down. That's a great question. Thank you.
If the decennial census is the most complete count of residents, how do you come up with estimates of undercount?
A great question. The short answer is there's 2 ways. The census does a post-enumeration survey, a nationally representative survey after the decennial census, which basically then they compare the results of the PES, post-enumeration survey, to the actual results that were from the enumeration in the decennial. And the second way is often using vital registration statistics, birth records, death records, migration, and immigration, which then allows the Bureau to compare the enumeration to those numbers. That's the simple answer.
I'm sorry if I missed. What are the options for limited English proficiency people to answer the census?
Yeah, so there's I have more information about this on my website. Thank you for the question. And I may defer to my Census Bureau colleagues, but 16 languages the publications will be. Is that right? 16? Let me defer to them.
So the internet instrument will be available in, I believe, 12 languages. And then if you were to call online, there will be additional languages available. And I think 16 sounds right. But then we also will have, like in 2010, the language assistance guides available. I think both online and paper as well. Yes, that sounds right. 59.
59 language assistance guides.
Furthermore, will the census be provided in alternative formats like Braille or like I work with deaf and hard of hearing populations that have a limited English proficiency, but do need videos in American Sign Language to help expand on some things. So I just wonder if people with disabilities were taken into consideration.
Great question.
So that's a really good question. We don't have those experts here today, but we can go back and check if that's one of the language, like American Sign Language is part of the 59 languages in the language.
Hey, Jason. I wanted to go back to the other question about the type of enumeration areas and all that. What people at Census always stress when they go out and give these talks is that anyone, no matter where you live, can go online and answer the census that way. Anyone, no matter where you live, can call up and answer the census that way. And everyone, regardless of like how you're initially contacted, will eventually either get in-person or a paper questionnaire. So it's kind of like there are different streams, but I don't want to make too much of a differentiation between them because everyone can kind of do everything, and a few people are going to get very different contact strategies, but that's like very small numbers. So for everyone else, it's kind of, you can do whatever you want. There'll be flexibility.
Thank you. Okay, maybe one more question in the back, and then.
This question is for Aldo. Or either one, but what are some of those organizations that are being funded to do the work with underserved populations? And then how do you see, for example, the public charge that goes into effect October 15th?
Yep.
How is that going to affect people participating in the census?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I'm going to tackle kind of the first piece of that. It's going to greatly affect that, as you and I both know. And there's I know a lot of folks within OHA at least have developed a lot of good FAQs around that. And as far as who the different organizations who are going to be funded, I don't think it's been determined yet, but we want to sort of, I'm happy to connect with you with the folks at CEFCO and United Way and the Dancing Hearts, the We Count Oregon campaign to determine that. There is a set of, I think, 13 anchor organizations who have the field expertise to do field work and sort of, be knocking on people's doors and all that sort of thing. But there's also going to be a portion of being able to apply for an RFP to house census assistance centers. That's going to be trained and sort of the training will be provided by the We Count Oregon campaign, so it'll be part of that umbrella of the Hard Count, and that'll be available for everybody across the state. And I think the goal is to have at least one census assistance center in every county, with a couple of other counties and local jurisdictions pitching in their own monies for additional funding for that. But I'm happy to connect more with you with the right people to answer the question more specifically. Yeah. Thank you.
So glad that we have somebody at the state level, the governor's office, working on this. And in addition to all the work that everybody else is doing. So next we're going to hear from Michael Haas, Senior Advisor for Data Access and Privacy at the Census Bureau. And there's new things that we need to understand about the way that our privacy is going to be protected from the 2020 census. Thank you. Once again, he's here from Census Bureau headquarters, so thanks for making a long trip to the Pacific Northwest.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. And let me see if I can find my slide deck there. So while that's getting loaded up, quick show of hands. How many of you have heard of differential privacy before today? You guys don't have. Okay, of those who raised their hands, keep them up for a second. And keep your hand up if you understand differential privacy. Okay, well, hopefully that will change. Hopefully by the end of the next hour, you will all be able to raise your hands for both questions, or at least minimally. And I apologize, the differential privacy or the privacy talks generally always get scheduled right after lunch. I'll try to make it an exciting conversation for you. It's exciting for me, actually. So hopefully I'll rope you in and you'll think the privacy is exciting too. So just a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We already heard a little bit about Title 13. I'll cover just a tiny bit more, and the Census Bureau's commitment to data stewardship. I'll give an overview of the history of privacy protections in Census Bureau data products. I'll talk about the growing threat to privacy and why we are making a change. I'll cover differential privacy, give you a little idea of what it is, and also help dispel some of the misinformation about it. And then I'll discuss the implications for the 2020 decennial census. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So data stewardship is central to the Census Bureau's mission, and our core mission is to produce quality and timely statistics about the nation's people and our economy. And our commitment to protect that privacy and protect the confidentiality of our respondents' data is both legal, it's a legal obligation that we have, but it's also a core aspect of our institutional culture and ethos. Title 13, Section 9 of the US Code, as you heard before, prohibits the Census Bureau from releasing any identifiable data about our respondents. Census Bureau employees are sworn for life to protect the confidentiality of that information. And this is a serious obligation on our parts. If we violate that, we could be put into prison for up to 5 years and fined up to $250,000. So this is something that we are very serious about. And to give you an idea, here's a quote from a Supreme Court decision, Baldridge v. Shapiro, that really stresses that in administering this obligation, the Census Bureau has no discretion about whether to disclose or not disclose identifiable data. This is an absolute. But safeguarding the confidentiality of census data is more than just about compliance with the law. The very success of our operations in terms of collecting and publishing useful statistics relies on our ability to keep the public's trust. And in an era of declining trust in government, you saw that lovely slide earlier that showed how public trust in government has declined over the years. In this era of declining trust in government, and in an era where we were constantly getting bombarded with news about major data breaches by corporations, by other entities, sometimes by the federal government themselves, privacy is really at the forefront of many people's minds. And it is really critical and imperative for the Census Bureau to do everything that we can to shore up and maintain the public's trust in our ability to safeguard their information. So data stewardship is really a core component of what we believe and what we practice at the US Census Bureau. But we also have to remember that it's not just about protecting privacy the day we release the data. It's also about making sure that those data remain private 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So we have to ensure that the disclosure avoidance methods that we use to protect privacy in our data are sufficient to protect those data down the road as well as today. So over the past 100 years, the Census Bureau has been, and I can say this very proudly, the Census Bureau has been one of the global leaders in the development and application of statistical techniques to protect privacy in data publications. And as we have added new information to the census, as we've developed new data products over the years, and as our data users have been interested in more detail and finer geographies, we have had to adapt our privacy protection methods to keep pace with the new privacy challenges. In the 1930s, we actually had to stop publishing some small area data when we realized that those posed unique privacy risks. In the 1970s, we actually had to go into suppressing whole tables from our census data products because of those privacy challenges. By 1990, with greater interest in having more granular data about small populations and lower level geographies, we realized that we had to start implementing additional protections into the data in order to publish those data products. And so we started using a technique called data swapping, which I'll talk a little more about shortly. And now for 2020, with kind of a growing realization that traditional methods that have been used to protect privacy are increasingly insufficient, we are now shifting to what is called formal privacy or differential privacy. You'll hear those two terms used interchangeably. They essentially mean the same thing. I do want to stress that any statistical technique that you use to protect privacy in data publications, whether it's suppression, swapping, formal privacy, etc., all of these techniques have an impact on the accuracy and usability of the data. That's an inherent consequence of applying these privacy protections. Traditional approaches to protecting privacy, such as suppression, coarsening, perturbation, etc., have had significant impacts on the usability of the resulting data. But for the most part, and for most data users, those impacts have been mostly or entirely opaque. Most of our data users are unaware of the impacts that those methods have had on the accuracy of the data that we publish, largely because in order to protect privacy, we can't say what impact those protections have had. That changes with formal privacy, and we'll talk about the benefits of formal privacy in that regard in a moment. Suppression, really quickly, just essentially involves removing sensitive values from the data or removing entire tables, suppressing those. You end up with Swiss cheese, for those of you who like the graphic. Coarsening. This is another common technique that's been used throughout our history. This involves aggregating geographies, collapsing reporting categories into supercategories, rounding values, reporting values in ranges, etc. Data swapping, which I mentioned earlier. This was the technique used in 1990 through 2010 for census data products, where we would swap at the household level. We would take a household over in Block A and swap all the individuals from that household with the household over in Block B, essentially swapping all their records to introduce uncertainty to make it harder to pick out specific individuals in the data that we publish. Injection of noise. This has commonly been done in a variety of Census Bureau products where you inject statistically unbiased noise into the data, jittering the values slightly to again, introduce a little bit of uncertainty to protect privacy without affecting the overall analytical results. The challenge in all of this is that traditional approaches to protecting privacy are largely subjective. They rely a lot on expert opinion, on hypothetical situations where you're like putting yourself in the shoes of someone attempting to pick out specific individuals in the data. So practitioners of this have largely relied on expert judgment and their own personal experience in applying these techniques to assess, okay, how much protection is necessary. But actually quantifying those risks using traditional methods is, for all intents and purposes, impossible. You can do it if you make a whole lot of assumptions about what an attacker might be able to do to try to pick out individuals, but it's very difficult to really quantify that. So consequently, as we have become more and more aware of growing privacy threats, which I'll talk about in a moment, the practitioners of privacy protections that rely on traditional methods like suppression, coarsening, perturbation, noise injection, swapping, have understood that they've needed to increase the parameters and thresholds of their methods, but they've been largely guessing at just how much of the increases in those thresholds, those swapping rates, et cetera, is necessary to adequately protect privacy. But as these trends haven't been objectively measured, no concrete way to really determine how much they needed to do until now. And that brings us to the growing privacy threat. In short, we have a lot more data available to us, and we have much faster and better computers. There's the old adage, nothing that ever gets put on the internet ever goes away. That's very much true. And if you look out there, there are copious amounts of data about each and every one of us available for free or for nearly free through myriad sources. Commercial data, voter registry data, data breaches that now live on the internet, etc. All of these data can be leveraged by a determined individual to attempt to pick out you or someone else in the data products that the Census Bureau publishes. Similarly, today's computers are able to perform these kind of complex, large-scale calculations that would be necessary to make those matches, to attempt those re-identifications with increasing ease. So this confluence of much more data available about us and the computers that can leverage that data pose a serious risk to the data that the Census Bureau publishes, or that any agency publishes for that matter, when releasing statistics. So to give you an idea, how many of you play Sudoku? Or are familiar with Sudoku at least? You know that if you put enough numbers, pre-populate enough numbers into that grid, there will be eventually one and only one solution to that particular Sudoku grid, right? Well, similarly with tabular data products. Every publication of information that the Census Bureau makes leaks a little bit of information about each and every one of us. We are reflected in the numbers in those tables. There's an old, not old, it's from about 15 years ago, mathematical proof that was done eventually called the database reconstruction theorem, that says that if you've got a confidential database and you publish too many statistics that are too accurate, that are derived from that confidential database, eventually you will reveal the entire database with absolute certainty. Essentially, every statistic you publish leaks a little bit of information. And if you publish enough of those, you've leaked enough information to reveal the underlying confidential data. So reconstruction essentially involves taking tabular aggregate data releases and using it to reconstruct the underlying confidential individual level data. And computer algorithms can do this very, very easily. So here's an example. Let's say you have a sample census block and you get all the confidential data from the individuals on that block. Let's say there were 7 people in this particular block. You aggregate them up and you've got some aggregate tabular statistics. A MacBook Pro from 2013 could take that tabular data and produce the one and only one unique solution for what the underlying confidential microdata would have been in about 0.2 seconds. Essentially, it takes all of that tabular information and converts it into a series of simple algebraic equations, solves for the unknowns, and you have the unique possible combination of microdata that could produce that table. Now, this is an example for a very small geography with just a few people, but this can be done at very large scale, very easily by computers today. Now, that didn't put names on it, so it would be difficult to pick out a specific individual and attach a name to it, right? Well, not really, because some of those other data points here, for example, age, sex, those, and we know what block they're in, those are what we call pseudo identifiers. So with those pseudo identifiers, you could then link those records based on age, sex, and location to some external database, say financial records or voter registration data, etc., that has names attached to it. And now you have name attached to more sensitive attributes about those individuals that were included in those tables, like race or relationship status. So this is what's called re-identification. So the privacy threat comes in kind of 2 steps. Reconstruction from the aggregate data that we release, and then re-identification of those individual level records that attaches names onto it. This isn't just a theoretical possibility. This is something we see in the news all the time with increasing frequency. Back in the late 90s, the governor of Massachusetts' health records were re-identified in a supposedly de-identified data set. We've seen this with AOL search data, with Netflix's user data. Washington State's medical records were re-identified just a few years ago. And these are just a few of many experiments that have been done in this regard, and this is happening more and more frequently. So with this in mind, the Census Bureau decided, okay, let's do some experiments to see how vulnerable our traditional approaches to protecting privacy are. So for the 2010 census, we collected a handful of data points on approximately 309 million individuals. This gave us about 1.9 billion confidential data points. Now you remember I said anytime you publish any statistics, even aggregate, even at high levels of geography, etc., you leak tiny bits of private information. Well, from those 1.9 billion confidential data points, the Census Bureau published 7.7 billion statistics. Even if each one of those statistics only leaks a tiny, tiny bit of information, you can imagine over the sum of all of those statistics we released, well, how much private information actually leaks? So we conducted this internal research to actually quantify that. So we decided to perform a database reconstruction for all of the 309 million people that were enumerated in the 2010 census using just a portion, and I want to stress just a portion, of the public data products that were produced after 2010. From those individually reconstructed records, we then tried to link those using those pseudo identifiers of location, sex, and age to commercially available data. And that gave us a set of probable re-identifications. We then confirmed those by comparing those probable re-identifications against the original confidential data to assess, okay, how vulnerable were these? How did we do? Well, we were able to very accurately, with 100% accuracy, determine census block and voting age, whether you were 18 or more or less than 18, for every individual in all 6.2 million inhabited blocks. We were able to determine block, sex, age in years, race, to the OMB's 63 racial categories, and ethnicity for 46% of the population, 142 million individuals. And if you allowed a little margin of error on age, plus or minus 1 year, we were able to reconstruct it for 71% of the population, so 219 million people. So we then took those 219 million and tried to re-identify them by linking them to a third-party commercially available database. We were able to get probable re-identifications for 45% of the population, 138 million people. Comparing those probable re-identifications to the original confidential data, we confirmed that we had accurately re-identified 52 million people using exclusively publicly available information from the 2010. So you might ask, well, so what? What could somebody learn from this? Well, most commercially available data doesn't include variables like race or ethnicity or relationship status. So for those individuals that we were able to re-identify, a determined hacker who did the same thing would have been able to learn self-reported race, self-reported ethnicity, and relationship to householder status for those 52 million people. So once we realized this, the Census Bureau decided that because of these growing threats, because we have now demonstrated that traditional approaches to protecting privacy are increasingly insufficient to protect against these faster computers, better algorithms, and this proliferation of data that can be leveraged in a re-identification attack, we decided that we had, in order to meet our continuing obligations to safeguard respondent privacy and the confidentiality of their data, we had to modernize our approaches to protecting privacy and shift us into something that was more quantifiable, that where we could give firmer guarantees about just how safe these data are. And that brings us to differential privacy. As I said, this term is used interchangeably with formal privacy. What it essentially is, it's not actually a method for protecting data, the same way that data swapping or coarsening is. It's really a framework for how you go about protecting the data. And the way it works is by quantifying, measuring and quantifying that privacy leakage, that leakage of private information that occurs with every statistic that you publish or release. So we quantify that leakage, that added risk, for every calculation or table or data product that we produce. And that quantification holds no matter what external data is available that could be leveraged. And it holds not just today with today's computing power or today's algorithms, but it holds true 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 50 years from now. No more data could be leaked from those statistics than what we have measured in that original quantification. So at its core, differential privacy is a promise to our respondents, essentially saying, we are giving you this guarantee that your data cannot be used against you more than this guarantee that we are providing, no matter what other information are available or what tools might be at the attacker's disposal. Put another way, moving towards formal privacy represents a shift in how we think about privacy risk. So traditional disclosure avoidance methods, data swapping, suppression, etc., try to assess the risk to the individuals by putting yourself in the shoes of a possible attacker, somebody who might try to re-identify, and essentially say, okay, at this precise moment in time, what is the likelihood that an individual could re-identify you and infer some sensitive piece of information about you by this particular attacker with a defined set of external information? So it requires that you essentially come up with a bunch of assumptions about the attacker will have this third-party data set at their disposal to do the re-identifications. They will have this type of computer and this type of algorithm available to do the reconstructions and to perform the linkages. And then you can assess, okay, with that set of assumptions, how many people's data could be re-identified successfully or relatively successfully. That's the traditional way of approaching it. Formal privacy takes a different tact. And as I said, it looks at that, it tries to quantify that degree of private information leakage in any statistic. So it uses as its baseline this hypothetical world in which you as the individual submit completely erroneous information on your form. That's the baseline. Now, against that baseline, in the real world where you provide accurate information on your census form, and that accurate information is included in our tabulations, it measures, okay, how much new information about you is leaked through those published tabulations that could allow some hypothetical attacker to try to re-identify you compared to that world in which case you provided erroneous information. And it allows you to quantify that maximum worst case amount of private information leakage through data publications. And it does this by essentially measuring the sensitivity of any calculation that gets performed. So how much would the calculation or tabulation be affected by removing your data from it? And this is a very, very simple example about how calculating an average age would be impacted by removing any one of these three individuals. But the sensitivity of any calculation is going to be impacted by a number of things, including the type of calculation you're performing, counts versus means versus medians, for example, the size of the population against which you're tabulating the data, the range of possible values that the data could take, etc. So differential privacy essentially measures how sensitive any given calculation would be to one person's data changing, and then uses that measure of sensitivity to decide exactly how much noise, a precisely calibrated amount of statistically unbiased noise, that needs to be injected into that tabulation or that calculation's result to limit the privacy leakage to a set amount. A differentially private approach also allows you to then decide, as I mentioned before, all disclosure avoidance methods impact the accuracy of the data to some degree. Differential privacy allows you to decide exactly where on that spectrum of perfectly private and no accuracy to perfectly accurate and no privacy you actually want to be. You can calibrate where on that spectrum to position yourself. And you do that by establishing what's called a privacy loss budget. Privacy loss budget, privacy budget, symbolized by the Greek letter epsilon. You'll hear those who talk about differential privacy using all three interchangeably. The only way that you can absolutely perfectly guarantee that you will never release any private information would be to never publish any data at all. As I said, any statistic you release based on a confidential data source is going to leak some private information. It'll likely be a very minute amount of private information, but every statistic will release some private information. Differential privacy allows you to quantify exactly how much is acceptable leakage. And the privacy loss budget is the catch-all for determining that. And it ranges from 0, which is the world of perfect privacy and terrible data, to infinity, which would be perfect accuracy. You're essentially releasing the raw confidential data and no privacy at all. Now, we can easily understand neither extreme there would satisfy our dual mission to produce accurate and useful statistics about the nation's people and economy and simultaneously meet our obligations under Title 13. So we have to set a budget that's in between there. So let me give you an idea of what different levels of epsilon might mean in the real world. Now, I want to stress the numbers that are included here are specific to this scenario that I'm about to walk you through, and if we change the parameters of the scenario, those numbers will change, but this is just an example. So let's say that Sarah is determined to find out Joe's exact age. Now remember, I said with formal privacy, we measure that privacy leakage, that risk, against the hypothetical world in which Joe provided completely erroneous information on his census form. So let's say in that hypothetical world where Joe just fills in gibberish on his census form, the best Sarah could do is to determine that there's a 2% likelihood that Joe is actually 43 years old. That's our baseline. She could come up with that 2% likelihood without Joe ever filling out his form, or with him filling it out completely erroneously. But now let's say Joe actually did fill out his form accurately, and his information is included in the census and included in all of those tabulations. So each statistic that we publish based on Joe's census form is going to leak a little bit of information about Joe. And that little bit of information can help Sarah improve her inference about Joe's exact age. So different settings of a privacy loss budget, that epsilon, to use the Greek letter, quantify exactly how much would be the maximum worst case leakage that could occur. So epsilon of 0, remember, that would be the perfect privacy side of it. It's useless data. You haven't released anything, really. So we're stuck with her hypothetical of the 2% likelihood. If you move to an epsilon of 1, and this is a logarithmic scale, so each one is substantially greater than the last. Epsilon of 1, well, enough information has leaked that in the perfect world, this worst case world, Sarah's inference about Joe's exact age could now increase to she has a 13% likelihood that Joe is 43 years old. At an epsilon of 2, worst case scenario again, she has now been able to glean enough additional bits of private information to have a 52% likelihood that Joe is 43. And at any epsilon greater than 4.3 in this particular case, she's now gleaned enough bits of information to have a 99% chance that Joe is 43 years old. So this shows how at different settings of a privacy loss budget, again, assuming this worst case world where she's able to leverage everything from every statistic, she's able to improve her inference as the privacy loss budget goes up. Now, this privacy loss budget is a global budget. It applies to every piece of information that gets produced through the data collection and data products. But each calculation, each tabulation, each table, each data product consumes a fraction of that privacy budget. And together, each one of those adds up to your total global privacy loss budget. But what this means is it means that you can actually allocate that privacy loss budget differently across different levels of geography, across different data products, et cetera, so that you can prioritize where you want to ensure higher accuracy, or where you can kind of pare back on the accuracy in favor of others. So when differential privacy is applied, the overall accuracy of the data are going to be influenced by a variety of factors. As I said, the number of calculations that you're performing or the number of tables that you're generating, each one of them uses a share of that budget. Also, the type of the calculations you're performing. Different types of calculations require different amounts of privacy loss budget to calculate. The size of the underlying population for each calculation or table. The range of possible values. The overall budget, as I said, the overall epsilon, and then how that budget is allocated across your various calculations and tables will each, in their own way, impact the resulting accuracy of the statistics that you are releasing. Now, I want to stress, there's been a lot of kind of discussion about differential privacy. Those of you who might have been following it on Twitter or in some of the blogs, you'll see statements like differential privacy means the end of accuracy in statistics, or it's terrible for accuracy, or pick your way of kind of rehashing that idea differently. I want to really point out that if you're comparing differential privacy to traditional disclosure avoidance methods, neither is inherently better or worse from the standpoint of data accuracy. It all depends on the parameters that you set. You can apply traditional methods with parameters that make the resulting data highly inaccurate. You can apply differential privacy with a privacy loss budget that results in highly accurate data. So neither is inherently better or worse from the perspective of data accuracy. It entirely depends on what parameters you set. For traditional methods, your swapping rate or your noise injection rate, etc. For differential privacy, it depends on what privacy loss budget you set and how you allocate that budget across your calculations. Where the two types of methods, traditional methods versus formal privacy, do differ is on the privacy front. Because differential privacy allows you to give an absolute guarantee that doesn't rely on you putting yourself in the position of a would-be attacker. It doesn't require you to guess what types of third-party data sources or computing environments or matching algorithms might exist. This is it's the worst case scenario, but it holds true today, 5 years from now, 50 years from now. We don't have to predict what the future will look like in order to make that guarantee. So what are the implications for the 2020 census? I want to stress, the shift to differential privacy for 2020 is not going to change our constitutional mandate to apportion seats in the House of Representatives using the actual enumerated population. State population totals are being held invariant. So I'm going to put that right out there. Similarly, as we have in previous censuses, we will apply privacy protections to the redistricting data within states. So the PL 94-171 redistricting data will have formal privacy applied to them, as previous censuses had privacy protections applied to the redistricting data as well. The shift to differential privacy does, however, require us to reevaluate the quantity of the statistics and tabulations that we're releasing, because, as I mentioned before, every table, every statistic we publish uses up a share of that privacy loss budget. So in order to ensure that we're not expending privacy loss budget, and therefore accuracy, on tables or statistics that nobody is using, we're reevaluating what we're releasing to make sure that we're being judicious in how we are allocating that privacy loss budget to maximize accuracy for what we do publish. Again, the shift to differential privacy allows us to make a quantifiable promise to our respondents. It gives us a formal, verifiable, and measurable guarantee to the public that we are safeguarding their data. And, as I said before, this is future-proof. That guarantee holds today, 5 years from now, 50 years from now. It's mathematically proven. As I said, we're reevaluating some of the data products that we're going to be releasing, and my colleagues Mark and Rachel are going to be talking about those data products in a moment. But our senior policymakers at the Census Bureau have a number of important decisions that they're going to have to make over the coming months and year. They're going to have to decide what the overall privacy budget for 2020 is going to be. They are still going to have to finalize that list of data products. What statistics and tables are we going to be releasing at what levels of geography? And they have to decide how they're going to allocate that overall privacy budget across different data products, across different geographies, et cetera. So hearing from data users like yourselves is really critical for us, because that will allow our senior policymakers to make the most informed decision possible. And to that end, we are about to release later this month a set of demonstration products where we are applying our differentially private disclosure avoidance system to a set of the data from the 2010 census. On this particular set will include the PL94, redistricting data, and selected tables on demographic and housing characteristics. This will allow data users to assess the impacts of the shift to differential privacy, and it will allow you to kind of go through and run these data through your analyses that you typically do with census data. Let us see, okay, what might the impact be on demographic projections that you are doing within your municipalities, or what impact might it have on redistricting efforts within your state. Our target date for this release is sometime in October. I know today's October 1st. We're hoping to have it out later this month. We will be releasing the table shells and structure in advance, and I know Mark and Rachel are going to be talking a little bit more about these demonstration products in a moment. With that, I've got 19 minutes for questions. So I know I just bombarded you with lots of privacy information, so I'm happy to help clarify some of it. Yes, sir. Let's get the microphone. Hang on.
I don't know if you were here when I said, but I'm a former Bureau employee.
I was here for it,
okay.
yes.
Okay. And interesting enough, I worked on the data products for basically my career, starting in 1970 with the census. So I'm very familiar with the summary tape files, and I'm very familiar with, for someone that's not like a mathematical statistician, granted, but some of the techniques, allocation, substitution. Well, I have two comments, and one thing I'm curious about, like, starting with the 2010 census, the census questionnaire was greatly simplified. But put it another way, there were a lot of variables, socioeconomic variables, that were collected historically on the decennial census, all the way up from like 1970 to 2000, things like income, as an example, education, things of that sort. Then the decision was made because of cost factors. First of all, it was to gather all that information, and even on the sample basis in the decennial census, and then to process it just slowed down the release of statistics, and then the data would get old very quickly. So the decision was made to go to the American Communities Survey. And so therefore, that's what we're relying on now, census users, for those types of data that are sensitive. It seems to me, from my perspective, that's a great leap forward, because now you've complicated the situation. Like we were talking about data reconstruction. So, for example, we're talking ACS 5 years, where you have samples and tracts, multi-year for points of time. I would imagine that would really throw a big monkey wrench in someone trying to, identify people. Your thoughts on that?
So the fundamental law of database reconstruction still does apply to sample-based surveys. It is certainly true that the nature of sample surveys does make reconstruction harder, but given the richness of the data that are included in many of the census's sample surveys, including especially the ACS, most of the individuals that are sampled are population uniques, as we call them, where their particular combination of pseudo identifiers is sufficient to make them unique within the overall population. So the privacy concerns remain, and so the Census Bureau has stated that our intention is to move all of our data products, including eventually the American Community Survey, to formally private statistical methods on a rolling basis over the coming years. However, the nature of particularly the ACS and the complexities of applying differential privacy to a weighted longitudinal survey, a weighted survey, and the longitudinal surveys pose their own challenges, but the challenges of applying formal privacy to a complex weighted survey design like the ACS are sufficient that it's going to take us a substantial amount of time to be prepared to do that. So, and we want to make sure that we are taking the data user data user feedback into great account in the design and implementation of privacy protections. So we have said we're not going to be applying formal privacy to the ACS until at least 2025.
Okay, but I guess where I've not quite followed, I mean, I understand what your answer, but let's just say the 5-year data for the ACS at the tract level. My understanding is, for example, when they're publishing that data, they have to collect the data over a 5-year period, 5 points in time. And that to me would really, if you're trying to identify a specific individual, would be a real challenge to try to reconstruct, because the data set, it's not like the decennial census where it's 1 point in time and you got all the records that are there. A case in point, I moved into a retirement community. I moved into a retirement community in 2016, as an example. So, and so looking at the 2010 census, or if they were doing the sample, within 2 or 3 years, I'm in a different tract, totally. So.
The added complexity, I mean, yes, it does make the attacker's job harder, but it doesn't make it hard enough. And we have been applying privacy protections to the ACS since its origins, and we recognize that those protections need to be improved over time. Yeah, I saw there was a question over here, right?
Yeah, Michael, thank you for your presentation. This has been great. My question is more of if you could clarify something for me. In a previous slide, you were showing, that was when you were talking about the different factors that impact, I guess like the epsilon, or one of the things you mentioned was the population size of the subgroup. Is that correct?
It impacts the accuracy, not the epsilon, yeah.
Okay, so so am I understanding that based off of for population groups where they're smaller, are they more at risk, by risk, I mean, are they more likely to have noise introduced or be removed from the estimate?
So yes, so generally speaking, when you get to geographies or tabulations that represent smaller populations, you will see a greater likelihood of noise impacting the result. As geographies go higher on the hierarchy and as the underlying populations grow, the impact of the noise is going to be substantially reduced.
So for political and racial minorities, particularly in Oregon, that have smaller subgroup sizes, would it be fair to say that they may be disproportionately impacted by noise introduced into their answers?
Disproportionately with respect to what, I guess would be the question.
Yeah, I guess, sorry, maybe disproportionately is not the right word. Or would they be more likely to have noise introduced based off of if they're a smaller population size?
So not necessarily.
Okay.
Because the noise doesn't get injected by population,
sure.
It gets injected by tabulation. So, for example, you could think about in the disclosure avoidance system, we take very detailed measurements of pretty much every cross-tabulation of every variable in the census. And we use those to inform how the noise is being produced. Where the noise gets injected is that, to a small degree, any individual person's, I'm simplifying things here for explanation's sake, but any single person's race could be shifted to some other racial category. And so you might see an American Indian or Alaskan Native respondent getting recoded as getting recoded as Asian, or you might see a white respondent getting recoded as American Indian or Alaskan Native. That's how the noise kind of works. Again, I'm oversimplifying, but it's applied at the variable level and at the tabulation level, not at the subpopulation level. So it's not that it's not that we would be assigning a greater level of noise to one subpopulation than we're assigning to another. No, it's that they'll all be subject to that noise you will see greater noise at the block level than you would see at the county level. And thus, numbers for different groups will change because of that noise injection, but it's not like we're targeting one group to have a greater level of noise than another, no.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, if you could pass the microphone down.
It's a tough question. I'm a data coordinator for the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians. I work with a rather small racial population in a rural area with centers also in Portland, Salem, Eugene, around 11 county area. So I highly rely on census data in our planning for programs for the tribe. But I'm thinking that the privacy that you're talking about may reduce the accuracy and usability and availability of the information that I need for things like, especially as regards things like poverty, unemployment, racial statistics.
So poverty and unemployment are not collected on the census per se, so those would be
Through the
ACS data.
also,
And how we are going to apply formal privacy to the ACS, as I said, is a decision that's several years in the making, not until at least 2025. As for the AIAN data in the 2020 census, and again, my colleagues are going to be talking about the data products more in a moment, there are still a number of unanswered questions about what detailed tribal information and tribal products we're going to be releasing, because we are still working through the best way to optimize for accuracy in the data that we can publish. Any detailed racial or tribal information poses particular privacy challenges because of just the sheer number of possible values that those data can take. And as I said, that affects the sensitivity of the calculations, which increases the amount of noise that might be necessary. So we're looking at ways to optimize for accuracy based on how we're constructing those tables and how we're applying formal privacy to them. So there are a number of unanswered questions on that that we will be able to provide more information for in the coming months. But it's an issue that we are very much looking at and we're taking very seriously.
So given that you are right now talking about applying differential disclosure avoidance to the 2020 census and the ACS is yet to be determined, I have a couple of questions, I guess. Are you going to start publishing margins of error with the decennial census results? And in the existing ACS data where traditional disclosure avoidance has been applied, is that rolled into the margins of error? Is that why we see, is that partly why we see large margins of error the finer the data have been sliced and diced?
So two excellent questions. So the first question, are we going to publish margins of error based on the differential privacy for the 2020 census? For starters, I would say I wouldn't consider it a margin of error. I would consider it a margin of uncertainty. I know that's a semantic difference, but I think it's an important one. The decision on whether or not those will be published is a policy decision that has not yet been made by our Executive Policy Committee. I can say that it would be a mathematically, practically trivial issue even if we didn't publish them to be able to go in and calculate them based on the parameters of the disclosure avoidance system. So whether or not we publish them, you'd still be able to figure them out. But the decision on whether to publish them is a policy decision that hasn't been reached yet. As for the ACS question and whether the impact of privacy protections that have been traditionally applied to the ACS are factored into the margins of error, the answer there is no, because as I said, we haven't moved the ACS to formal privacy yet, and with traditional methods, in order to protect the methods themselves from being reverse engineered, we've had to keep the parameters about those methods opaque to our data users. There's very few individuals, even within the Census Bureau, that know the parameters of our disclosure avoidance techniques for things like previous censuses or the ACS, because that information is very sensitive by nature because it can be used to undo the privacy protections. The reason you see greater margins of error at lower levels of geography has to do with the sample design and the sample frame, where there's fewer respondents, essentially, from whom the statistics can be generated. I think there was a question up there, yes?
I'm going to let mine go, actually, it's fine. I think it's more or less been covered.
Oh, no, I was just... Oh, gotcha. Another question?
Hi again. So this is in regards to Title 13. So yes, the census has an obligation for making sure that the information that's collected can't be used to identify people. It sounds like a lot of the challenges and the catalyst for introducing this method comes from a lot of external pressures, such as the increases in technology, creator algorithms, as you stated, the plethora of administrative records. Well, the information that the decennial census asks is fairly basic. It's age, sex, your race, marriage status. It seems like that information could be collected through administrative records that people could also join. So at what point does the census also recognize or ask itself how responsible is it to, if there's enough administrative information out there to identify people without the census, is that question been asked or entertained?
That question has absolutely been asked, and it's one that I have to field just about every time I give this talk. So it's an excellent question, and I don't want to make light of that. I think I'll answer it by kind of pointing to two things. The first is I want to kind of scroll back to that Supreme Court quote that I had up there, which stressed that the Census Bureau has no discretion in this regard. Our obligations under Title 13 are absolute. We cannot release identifiable information. But to your point about, well, why does it matter if all this information is available elsewhere anyway? And it's not all available elsewhere. The Census Bureau enumerates a number of people who aren't necessarily in all those databases, or who aren't very well represented or very accurately represented in those databases. And we have an obligation to protect them as well. But similarly, most of those third-party data sources that can be leveraged to attempt a re-identification attack don't include things like race, ethnicity, or relationship status. They'll include the pseudo identifiers that make re-identification so easy, like age, sex, and location. Those are much more common in those third-party sources. But race, ethnicity, citizenship status, we talked about that earlier. I mean, those are things that are not typically included in those commercial databases. And so from a standpoint of sensitivity, those are certainly things that a determined hacker would attempt to re-identify our data in order to get for one reason or another.
Or they're included, but they're wrong.
Yeah, that's also possible too, yeah. And I'm just about out of time. Any last questions? Okay, then I'm gonna end with one question for you. So I started by asking you, how many of you thought you understood differential privacy? So I'm gonna ask again, how many of you think you understand differential privacy? Good, more hands, I feel better, okay. Well, here's my contact information. If you have any subsequent questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer them offline. And now I'm gonna turn things over to my esteemed colleagues, Mark and Rachel, to talk about the 2020 data products.
Okay, Mark Perry and Rachel Marks, they have long titles. You can read them in the speaker bios on our events page where you went to register. But they are both from the population division, which means that they're the people that push out the data that we use. And we're ending today hearing about what we can look forward to in 2021. My favorite time of the cycle, because I'm a a data user. Oh, yeah, in fact, I went to a meeting once where they had this icebreaker. It was a National Neighborhood Indicators Partnership meeting. And everybody there, it's a Urban Institute partnership with local cities, offices like mine that do neighborhood data. And the icebreaker, they asked everybody, what's your favorite data set? And when it was my turn, I said, Summary File 1. Well, it's not going to be called Summary File 1, but hopefully we'll get most of the data that we had in SF1.
Well, Charles, it can still remain your favorite data set. We're not going to take that away from you. Since you nerded out a little bit, I'm going to do so as well. My name is Mark Perry. I'm happy to be here in Salem. This was one of the 9 cities over 100,000 people in the US that I had not been to yet. So now we're down to 8. Tonight we're going to Bend, which I believe has a pop of about 99,000. So I'm going to kind of pre-visit there. Nope, I set the rules. So when I... With the noise injection, it's going to hit it. So when I go there tonight, I'll be down to 8 cities. So it's very exciting. So is the speaker working right here? It's a little. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, but okay. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Rachel and I are happy to be here from great old Suitland, Maryland, to talk to you about the proposed 2020 census data products. Please feel free to raise your hand, ask questions at any point. This is a very sort of structured presentation. I'll do the first half, she'll do the second half. You can't kind of throw us off if you have any questions or if you need clarification of anything. Sometimes we slip into census jargon despite our best efforts not to. So we're going to talk to you very briefly today about, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. We're going to talk to you very briefly today about the 2020 census data products and the kind of impact of everything that Michael was just talking about with disclosure avoidance and sort of the changes that it is realizing on 2020. So over this past year, we have been going out talking to groups like yourselves about the proposed data products for 2020 and sort of the impact of disclosure avoidance on that and sort of the changes that we may or may not see from it. So this presentation is sort of where we are right now in that process. We've got if you heard this talk maybe 6 months ago, you would have heard quite a bit less detail. If you hear this talk 6 months from now, we'll probably have quite a bit more detail. Where we are right now, I'll just kind of preface everything by saying we're at a little bit, communication-wise, a little bit of an awkward phase where in terms of our products, we know an awful lot of detail about some of the things we're going to put out. Other things, there's still lots of fairly fundamental questions about their availability and kind of what they'll look like. And so when you're listening to this, just kind of keep that in mind, that just because we have a lot of detail and specificity about some things doesn't mean that translates kind of across the board. So there are still some, it's going to be very obvious very quickly. We have some fairly, big picture questions still that we're grappling with. So it's so just sort of keep that in mind as you're listening to us. So I'm not going to say much about the background here because Michael gave a really great sort of primer on all of our history of protecting the confidentiality of our respondents. But I'll just say that it's for those of us who have been at Census for a while, it's new. It's new even for those of us who've been here, and we know that we protect the confidentiality of our data and the privacy. But our goal, certainly for 2020, will remain the same as it always has been, is to put out as much data as we can, making all of our data users happy, but certainly balancing that with our privacy. So, today we're going to discuss the 2020 census data products that will be supported by the current differentially private disclosure avoidance system. We call it, I guess now, the top-down algorithm, as Michael would say. So we're developing other formal privacy systems to protect the 2020 census data products that include certain kinds of tabulations that provide counts of populations by detailed race and Hispanic origin groups, tribes, that was mentioned a little while ago, and populations by household and family types. So for those products that are not supported by this current disclosure avoidance system, we're conducting outreach to understand sort of what the must-have tables are in terms of detail and geography. So the initial feedback was collected through a July 2018 Federal Register notice that went out for, I believe, 30 days. It was extended for an additional 30 days and associated outreach. We got about 1,200 responses to that FR notice last year that asked for feedback on sort of how people use decennial census data products. So we've been doing additional outreach since then to obtain input from data users. Michael mentioned the 2010 Census Demonstration Data Products file that's being developed. This is going to allow external data users like yourself to examine the impact of accuracy of using differential privacy. And so Rachel will have a little bit more to say about that in a couple of minutes. But then additional outreach is certainly planned, including a National Academy of Sciences workshop in December, and we will talk a little bit about other outreach as well. Stakeholder feedback, combined with a review of table access rates, subject matter expert knowledge, et cetera, is helping to inform the development of our 2020 census data products. They'll include an initial set of products made up of legally mandated products and products with tables that are expected to be supported by current differential privacy. And then a later set of products are planned to be produced that will include tables that will be protected using other formal privacy systems. The design of those later set of products will be informed by feedback and any additional feedback that we receive along the way. So the proposed 2020 data products have a structure fairly similar to the 2010 census data products. And on this slide, we're grouping them into two categories. So at the top, we have the first category is those products that the current differential privacy system with the top-down algorithm either supports or is being expanded to support. And on the bottom are other products, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But this first group includes a few things that are fairly sort of the bread and butter products. So we have apportionment and the redistricting file. Those are the two legally mandated products. It also includes the demographic profiles, the demographic and housing characteristics file, and the congressional district demographic and housing characteristics file. The demographic and housing characteristics file, or as we call it now, the DHC, will include many of the tables that were available in Summary File 1 back in 2010, so your favorite data product. And the content of this product will be the focus of the presentation today, along with an overview of how to use the product specification document that I believe was sent around to everyone a few days ago for this. Did they maybe didn't get the link? Okay, that's fine, so they can look at it afterwards. So then the second category of products below includes tables and products where differentially private systems are going to still need to be developed to allow for the release. So this includes detailed race and Hispanic origin tables, some family and household tables that were included in Summary File 1 in 2010, all of Summary File 2, the American Indian and Alaska Native Summary File, and the Public Use Microdata Sample, or the PUMS file. So today's presentation will focus on those products that the current disclosure avoidance system supports or is being expanded to support. And that includes apportionment, redistricting, the demographic profile, demographic and housing characteristics file, and the congressional district demographic and housing characteristics file. We are mainly going to be talking about the redistricting file and the DHC and how you can get information about what is included in those files. So the redistricting file is a second product that's released from the 2020 census. So obviously the first one will be the apportionment product, which is very straightforward. Apportionment is simply state level population counts. There are 4 tables. They will be exactly the same as they were in 2010. So then we move on to the redistricting file. This product is the first file released that includes demographic and housing characteristics about detailed geographic areas. So those subjects will include voting age, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, occupancy status, and group quarters population for the major GQ types. The lowest level of geography is the census block, and the release date is constitutionally mandated to be within 1 year of census day. So it has to be released, all of the state files have to be released by April 1 of 2021. So they'll be going out on a flow basis, similar to 2010, where I think it was like 5 or 6 states a week went out each week in February and March. The 2018 redistricting file prototype spec is available on our census website. Yes, sir.
I have one question on that subject, including group quarter population. I know like every census, there's always a lot of contention about college, where you count college students.
Yes, yes.
Is there anything new or different in the definitions that we should be aware of? I mean, frankly, I haven't been following it that closely, but
No, there have not been major changes in the residence rules, is I guess what you were asking about, sort of where people get counted. No, there have been several FR notices that went out. There are some modest changes in where the parts of the overseas population that are included in the census. So if you're deployed military, you're included in the redistricting file this time, whereas before you weren't. But that's a fairly esoteric compared to overall things like where college students and prisoners are counted. In both those instances, there haven't been any changes since 2010.
Well, it's an example closer to home here, like in Utah. I recall, I think in the past census, that there was a big issue raised because they had so many Mormons were overseas doing missionary work.
Yes.
And they weren't, Utah was trying to make a case for another congressional seat.
Yeah, and there hasn't been any change with that.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So, we can then go on to the demographic and housing characteristics file. The DHC will include many of the demographic and housing tables that previously were included in Summary File 1 back in 2010. Topics included in the DHC are listed here, but I'll go into more detail on them in a couple of slides from now. So data in the DHC will be available for all geographies at and above the lowest level that they're released for. And in many cases, this will be the census block level, so very detailed. Notable exclusions from the 2020 DHC include tables that provide counts, as I mentioned before, for detailed race, detailed Hispanic origin, tribes, and population by household and family types. And this is due to challenges associated with the use of differential privacy for privacy protection. And we're developing other solutions at this point for the data products that include those tables. Then we move on to the demographic profile. This provides demographic and housing characteristics about local communities from selected DHC tables. And it's in a streamlined, fairly easy to use format. And we put this out as soon after the release of the redistricting product as possible. The subjects will include 5-year age groups, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, household type, relationship to householder, group quarters population, and housing occupancy and tenure. The current plan is for these to be available at the place and minor civil division level and above. So when considered together, the redistricting file and the demographic and housing characteristics file include a great deal of demographic and housing data, with much of it available down to the census block. So this slide, and I know it's maybe a little bit hard to read if you're in the back, but this shows what we plan to make available through the DHC at the lowest level of geography it's proposed to be available for. And in many cases, these tables will be repeated by major race and Hispanic origin groups. So where you see an asterisk next to a bullet that's indicating those tables are iterated by race and Hispanic origin. So at the census block level, this includes total population, urban-rural designation, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, sex by 5-year and other age groups, sex by single year of age, under age 20, relationship to householder, householders by householder characteristics, household type by relationship, households by presence of people of specific ages, housing tenure, household size, GQ population by sex and age for major GQ types, and median age for various groups. So then moving up to the census tract level, that includes population by single year of age up to 100 by sex, tenure by race by Hispanic or Latino origin, and tenure by presence of own children. At the county level, this includes household size by household type by presence of own children, household type by age of householder, and household type by presence of people of specific ages. And at the state level, this includes group quarters population by sex, by age, by major GQ type.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
So all of the ones at the census block level will also be available census tract county and state?
Exactly. The lowest level and then everything above it.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm now going to turn it over to Rachel for the next few slides.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So what we have prepared is a product specification for our demographic and housing characteristics file and our demographic profile, a proposal for the 2020 files. So this is available on our website, census.gov, and we will make sure that the direct link to this file is sent out to you so you can take a look at it. But what I'm going to do is kind of walk you through how to use this file, not necessarily all of the contents of this file. Mark has kind of done kind of a good job of that, telling you the subjects included. But what you can do once you get the file is kind of dive into it, see what's going to be available for 2020, see if there are things that are missing that you might need, and then reach out to us and let us know about that. So in this product specification, what you'll find are a list of all the tables included in the demographic and housing characteristics file. You'll also find a crosswalk from the 2010 Summary File 1 product to the 2020 demographic and housing characteristic product. So we have had to change the table numbers from the 2010 Summary File to the 2020 DHC file. You also find a list of tables that are new in the demographic and housing characteristic files, and also tables that were in SF1 but are no longer included in the DHC. Also included will be tables that will be included in the demographic profiles, and also importantly will be the proposed lowest levels of geography for each table. So if you use the summary files a lot, you're probably already familiar with this information, but if not, just or a refresher, all of the table names that you'll find in the file, you'll see have this nomenclature that tell you the lowest level of geography. So P table is for population table at the census block level. PCT indicates it's a population table at the census tract level. PCO is county level. PST, this is new for 2020. This means the table is available at the state level. And then same thing for H, housing table at the block level. HCT is the housing table at the census tract level. And again, as mentioned earlier, if a table is available at the block level, it would be available for all geographies above that level as well. So this is a screenshot of one of the tabs available in the file. This is a screenshot of the crosswalk file. On the bottom here, it might be hard to see, but I'll just read off some of the tabs that you can see. Let's see if you can see this here. There's a list of tables, the first two here for the demographic profile. So you'll have the demographic profile list of tables, and then you'll also have table shells for the demographic profile, so you can get in and see what those look like. You'll have this file here, the DHC README, which will tell you important information about the DHC files, and then the DHC crosswalk file, and that's what this screen here is, and then also the DHC tables. So here in the crosswalk file, this is where you will see the 2010 census table number compared to the 2020 census table number. Then we'll have the title of the tables, the lowest level of geography, and then this column here will tell you if we're proposing to include it for 2020 census or not. So as you can see, for example, some of the table numbers have changed, and for example, some of the levels of geography as well. So here an example is table P7 for Hispanic or Latino origin by race, total races tallied. It used to be table P7. In 2020, right now, we are proposing PC01. So this means that it's changed from the block level to the county level. Now this isn't a great example because these data are also available in the redistricting data all the way down to the block level. Moving down, you can also see that tables P8 through P11, if they are no longer available in the 2020 census data file, the DHC. And as Mark mentioned, a lot of this is due to the feedback we received and looking at some of our usage statistics. So moving on, our next tab here, we would show, we have included the actual table shells for the DHC, and you can look in the table shells and see if we've made any changes. Here on the screen are examples from tables P1 through P4. In our DHC file, you'll also see that some of our tables are repeated as in 2010 for some of our major race and Hispanic origin groups. These tables, the same as in 2010, are identified with the letters A through I. So for example, on this screen, you can see table P7 is repeated for the Asian population, and it's indicated as it shows P7D. And here on the screen, you can see all of the iterated groups. We have the white alone, black alone, American Indian, Alaska Native alone, Asian, Native Hawaiian, or other Pacific Islander, some other race, two or more populations, Hispanic or Latino, and the white alone, not Hispanic. And these, again, are the same as in the 2010 census. So as I mentioned, we've also included here, this is the list of tables available for the demographic profile that we're proposing for the 2020 census. And the demographic profile will be available down to the place and MCD level. So we have additional data products available as well. We are proposing, as in the 2010 census briefs, population housing tables, and special reports. These products will provide additional analyses of the data available in some of these other products. And for all of these products, we are proposing to produce this data for the largest places. And this is the same as in the 2010 census. This screen here is just a summary of where our current status is for all of our data products. So it's kind of chunked out here in these, the gray and white blocks. So the first block here is the apportionment product, the redistricting file, the demographic profiles, and the DHC. And these products, as we discussed earlier, are the products that our current disclosure avoidance system currently supports or we know is going to be expanded to support. The next set here in the white, these are products that right now we're still researching ways that we're going to be able to protect the data for these products. So this includes things for person and household join tables from the Summary File 1 in 2010. This also includes data for detailed race and Hispanic origin and American Indian, Alaska Native tribes and villages. The next block here for the Congressional District Demographic and Housing Characteristics File, census briefs, population housing tables, and special reports. These data are primarily dependent on the products listed above in the first block that we know we can already produce using our disclosure avoidance system. We haven't really talked much about PUMs today, and that's mainly because we are continuing to research ways that we can produce the PUMs file for 2020. And finally, our summary of population housing characteristics file and our population of housing unit counts report series, the CPH 1 and 2. These are the longer PDF files that some data users like to use. Right now, we're not planning to publish these for the 2020 census, and this is largely because these files, the data in these files are available in our other data products. So we have been doing a lot of outreach over the past year, year and a half, to talk about our data products proposals and where we are, and to hear about how people are using the data. This is just a sampling of some of the outreach we've been doing. Hopefully some of you have heard about our data products proposal before and have had a chance to provide feedback. We have also released the code for the disclosure avoidance system, or the DAS, from our 2018 end-to-end census test. And if you're interested in looking at that, that link to that is available here on the screen. I'll also mention that along with that, for our 2018 end-to-end census test, the data for that, it looks like the redistricting file, that was the first product of the 2020 census to be released using the differential privacy, so you can actually take a look at that data if you wanted to see how different groups were impacted using that. We are also, there were some questions earlier about Epsilon. Any kind of decisions like that, policy decisions, are going to be documented and made available as part of our 2020 census memorandum series, and so they'll all be posted online for you to take a look at. We also have several upcoming meetings where we're going to continue to talk about the status of our data products. The first one there that actually happened last week. And we are actually, as someone mentioned earlier, talking about the uses of tribal data. We recognize that we still have a lot of research to do on the tribal pop data and how we can produce this data. So we are conducting a series of tribal consultations this fall, actually this month, it's now October, in both Alaska and New Mexico, to learn more about how tribes are using the American Indian Alaska Native data and how we can best meet their data needs. And we'll also be having our National Advisory Committee meeting this fall, and our Committee on National Statistics in December. And Michael did mention our demonstration products, so I won't talk too much about it, other than to say that it will be similar to the demographic and housing characteristics file that we presented today, and that the spreadsheet that you'll soon have access to. However, the demonstration product is only selected tables from the DHC. So we are planning to produce an updated file that will indicate which tables will be part of the DHC, so that people can plan in advance if they wish to take a look at the demonstration product. So the only other thing I'd want to say, in addition to this, if you have any questions, to definitely let us know, is that we do really want to encourage people to take a look at the DHC and the demographic profile specification, and to let us know if there are tables missing, or data lines missing, geographies missing that you need, and to please let us know. We, as Mark said, we did the Federal Register notice. We received over 1,000 comments, but we know we did not receive every single use case out there. So it's really important to us that everyone has a chance to look at this proposed file and let us know if there's something critical that you need for your work, for your program, for the state of Oregon, to let us know what's missing. And we really would like to hear that from you. So I think, if there are any questions, we have plenty of time.
And I want to add that I just emailed everybody who had registered as of Monday, emailed everybody the file, and we're also going to post it on our website on the events page where you went to register.
Somebody's got to have a question for us.
Thank you for coming.
That's not a question.
I have a question, but I think it's for Charles. I was just wondering if you're planning to take that demonstration comparisons and share that
Yeah, I was eager to, I hadn't heard before today about the 2010 demonstration files. That'd be really interesting. Because, I mean, the reason I love the summary file 1 is because I do estimates and forecasts for custom geographic areas. So we need that block data to build up from, for water districts, places that data isn't published for. And we need to be able to calculate migration rates and fertility and mortality rates. So that'll be real interesting to look at some custom areas maybe and see how it might have come out differently. It's late afternoon.
Yeah, just back there.
I just want to get a sense of, you mentioned how you're getting feedback in changing some products, particularly around ethnicity and race. So I just want to get a sense of what the thinking and rationale is behind that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. So we have been collecting feedback since last July on actually all of our data products. And so part of the reason that we're trying to collect feedback is so, Michael talked a lot about the privacy budget. And so because of the privacy budget, we just can't produce as many products as we produced in 2010. Otherwise, the data, it won't be accurate. So we are trying to figure out if there are products out there that people are not using, or instead they're using the ACS, not the decennial census. That's really helpful to us so that we can focus on producing the data products that people really need from the decennial census and make sure those products are accurate. So right now, we have collected a lot of feedback. We've received a ton of feedback on the demographic profile and what we're now calling the DHC, but we haven't received that much feedback on our Summary File 2 or our American Indian and Alaska Native Summary File. So in particular, right now, we're going out to the tribes and reaching out to them to find out how do they use these data. And that's in part because at the Census Bureau, we have a tribal policy, an American Indian Alaska Native tribal policy that we have to do that. Because it's part of our government-to-government relationship with the tribes. So that's kind of where we are and why we're doing that. And it's also, we want to make sure that we're meeting data users' needs. Honestly, we've never really done anything like this where we ask people, what are you using this data for? Or do you need this? A lot of our tables, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but a lot of our tables, they haven't changed for decades, So this is really the first time we're doing a wholesale analysis of our tables. So that being said, we really need feedback from people to tell us, this is an absolutely critical table for my program, for my state, and I use it for X, Y, Z. If you can tell us that you use it to get, federal funding, that's really helpful to us. We know that that's a really important table for you, and we're going to do our best to make sure that that table is published. Yeah.
I have to be honest, and I share some of the same, I don't know if it came out of concern, but I do have some of the same concerns about the race and ethnicity data not being available in those spaces. And so I guess a big question that I have in my mind is if you get feedback that says, no, we really need that information, please publish it, is it going to be met with sure, or is it going to be met with we've decided not to do that? You're going to have to find a different way.
Yeah, I definitely understand your concern.
Especially because feedback,
Yeah.
with the federal government, we tend not to.
Yeah.
So
I will be completely honest with you. My area of expertise is race ethnicity, so I feel your concern deeply about this data not potentially changing. So I would encourage you to send any feedback, but make sure that feedback has substance to it, not just we want the data. That's great, but why do you need it? Because otherwise, yeah, that could happen. But right now, where we are, the Census Bureau has made a commitment that it's going to produce the data. Now, I want to be clear that the race and ethnicity data, the major OMB race groups, it's going to be available. It's a part of the redistricting file, which is required by law. It will also be available in the demographic profile and the DHC. Where we are still researching solutions is for the detailed groups, right? So those write-in lines and the checkboxes for the detailed groups, that's where we're still researching solutions on how we can produce those data accurately.
Hey, Rachel, if I could add,
Mhm.
the other thing in terms of
adding to what Rachel said, like the other thing, not just knowing like we need the detailed race for this purpose, knowing at what level of geography you really need it, because the privacy challenges increase exponentially as you get down like farther and farther down towards the block level. So if you need detailed race, for example, at the tract level, it's much easier to produce that within a set privacy budget than it would be to do it at the block level. So knowing precisely where on that geographical hierarchy you need that precision is helpful for us, because that way, like, if people say we need it at the block level, we're going to expend a huge amount of privacy budget to generate that. But if people absolutely need high accuracy at like the tract or county level, then we can make trade-offs and say, okay, we won't release it at that lowest level of geography, we'll release it here, and you'll get much higher accuracy as a result. So knowing what your must-have use cases are at what specific level of geography is really helpful for us, because that allows us to make sure that we're not needlessly expending privacy budget and thus accuracy for tables that people are really using at a higher level. Every piece of feedback is helpful for us because it allows us to see, because we've gotten very little concrete feedback on how people are using that detailed information. So knowing what those use cases are in concrete terms, and whether they're, oh, we're using them for modeling or we're using them like for federal funds distribution, like those are important too, because the other reason being is that if we can't meet the use through one mechanism, we might be able to meet it through another. So knowing how you're using the data and for what purpose, at what level of geography and what level of disaggregation is really helpful for us, whether it's one person submitting it or 10,000 people submitting it.
Well, I piggybacking on these comments, I have a very specific example, and I will send it to POP 2020 Data Products, but I'll also mention it here. Maybe other people will also mention it. Rachel said that the broad race groups data would be included, but I'll suggest actually it's not included, and that's why I use summary file 2, because the alone or in combination, the percentage of African Americans who also mention something else, it varies from less than 2% in Louisiana and Mississippi to up to 50% in South Dakota. Oregon's at about 30%. So, if I want to calculate a black homeownership rate, for example, I have to go to summary file 2 because we're missing 30% of African Americans if we use those tables that have tenure for African American alone.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Mm-hmm.
So why isn't summary file 2 your favorite file?
Oh, well, summary file 1 hits most of my needs, but I have lots of needs, so I have to go to summary file 2 sometimes.
So just as a summary, what is the level that is going to be available for race and ethnicity without having to ask for a specific product? Is it a county or what level?
So for the detailed race and ethnicity, we're still determining that for 2020. So because we're still researching the way that we're going to be able to protect that data, we're still researching what levels of specificity for geography and also which detailed groups will be available.
Even counties in question?
But the redistricting file is going to look just like it did last time. So at the block level, I mean, for voting, drawing districts, you know, we're going to have the same, you know, broad race groups by Hispanic, Latino origin at the block level, just like we did 10 years ago. I think we're talking about things like, you know, Hmong population in a census tract, talking about, you know, Siletz Indian tribe at the county level. It's those thresholds, you know, I think that's what's in question in terms of detailed race.
Does the term detailed race, as you're using it here, does that include in combination with?
So that's a really good question. So in our redistricting file, we have the 56 multiple race combinations. So if someone says that they're Black and Asian, that is available all the way down to the block level. But if you want to see Black or African American in combination, and a characteristic for that, that's not available. But if you just want to see the count for that, that will be available. So it's kind of depends what you want to know about the in combination population. But for detailed race, when I say that, what I mean is something like Mexican, Hmong, Jamaican, something that someone would write in one of our write-in lines or a checkbox.
And much of that is new.
Yes, exactly. So, so earlier you saw the revised race question. So new for 2020 are the new white and black write-in lines. Yes.
You're talking about the write-in line. How flexible are you in what goes in the write-in line?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So for 2020, one of our enhancements for the race question, and this is particularly useful, I think, for the American Indian Alaska Native population, is that we are now collecting up to 200 characters. So in the past, we only collected 30 characters. So in addition to that, if someone writes in like an alternative spelling, we'll be able to capture that and put it with the correct tribe or detailed group. So if...
One more question there. For example, a person could write in Chetco, which is a subdivision of the Siletz. Now, how would that be done?
I can get back to you on that. I don't have our classified code list with us right now, but I can definitely get back to you. And we did do an American Indian Alaska Native coding survey in, I think, a year or two ago. It was completed, where we reached out to all of the tribes and asked them, you know, look at our code list. How are your tribal members identifying, or how will they identify in the 2020 census? Are we capturing them accurately? So we can check if that would be part of that. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
No harm in ending a few minutes early.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.